In today's overview, negotiations with Russia are inevitable. Is there a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Germany? Ukrainians explain why they do not work in Germany. The US promised Hamas the end of the war, but Israel does not agree. Italian Minister of Defense: direct intervention by the Italian military is out of the question. The reasons behind Macron's risky statements. Ukrainians do not want to entrust their lives to the current government. Will Kiev sit down at the negotiating table with Moscow? The only way to end the war in Ukraine. Hungary warns of a new world war. What can we expect from Xi Jinping's European visit? And Russian GDP is growing thanks to Russians returning home. Negotiations with Russia are inevitable. Vadim Skibitsky, deputy head of the Ukrainian Military Intelligence Service, for the first time admitted that peace talks with Russia would sooner or later be inevitable. On Thursday, Skibitsky told The Economist that a military victory is becoming increasingly unlikely. However, even if Ukraine manages to push Russia back to the 1999 Ukrainian borders, Kiev will not be able to avoid negotiations. The best time for this is the second half of 2025, Skibitsky believes. His statements differ both from the position of his boss Kirill Budanov, who foresees a conflict with Russia for decades, and from the position of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky. The latter ruled out the possibility of negotiations with Moscow as long as Vladimir Putin is president. Is there a resurgence of anti-Semitism in Germany? It is with great concern that I observe aggressive anti-Israeli statements in German universities, which also have an anti-Semitic background. Felix Klein, the German government's commissioner for combating anti-Semitism, said in an interview with the Rheinische Post newspaper. In an interview, Klein said that he constantly hears that Jewish students are responsible for the actions of the Israeli army. They are taken under collective arrest and allowed into classrooms for lectures or seminars only if they condemn military actions. As a result, many no longer dare to attend university or openly demonstrate their Jewish identity. Ukrainians explain why they do not work in Germany. Many Ukrainians who could work in Germany refuse to do it. The main reason behind this is citizen benefits. Many able-bodied Ukrainians in Germany are still out of work. Some of them explain why this is happening. The benefits we receive from the Social Security Department are very good, and we feel comfortable in Germany, the 27-year-old mother tells the Bild newspaper. A 40-year-old man says that he is not satisfied with the payment for the work that the employment center offers him. To be honest, it's not worth it. I don't have the motivation for this, he says. After all, if I worked for Amazon or other companies for 8 to 9 euros per hour, I would have to pay for the apartment, electricity, and water myself. This would be too little compared to the 563 euros of benefits I receive. The US promised Hamas the end of the war, but Israel does not agree. A senior Hamas source said that the organization's leadership approved the implementation of the first stage of the hostage release deal after the United States committed that the Israeli Defense Forces would completely withdraw from the Gaza Strip after 124 days from the start of the deal, and the war would end. According to the source, the Americans also promised Hamas that the IDF would not enter Rafah at any stage. However, an Israeli source stated the following: contrary to the publications, under no circumstances will Israel agree to the end of the war within the framework of the agreement on the release of the hostages. As the political echelon has decided, the IDF will enter Rafah and destroy the remaining Hamas battalions there, regardless of whether there will be a temporary delay for the release of the hostages or not. Italian Minister of Defense: direct intervention by the Italian military is out of the question. Our position is not changing. We have always said that Ukraine needs to be helped in all possible ways, but we have also always ruled out direct intervention by our military in the conflict, Defense Minister Guido Crosetto said in an interview with Corriere della Sera. As for the hypothesis that Italy may take part in a possible armed intervention, he is categorical. Absolutely not. Today, no one can question this. Unlike other countries, in our legal system there is an outright ban on direct military interventions, in addition to those provided for by law and the Constitution. We can contemplate armed intervention only if there is an international mandate, for example, in compliance with a UN resolution. According to Crosetto, the proposed intervention in Ukraine will launch a further spiral of conflict that will not benefit the Ukrainians. And about the words of French President Macron, he says, "I do not understand the purpose and benefit of these statements, which objectively raise tensions." The reasons behind Macron's risky statements. Macron received Chinese President Xi Jinping in Paris, called Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and in recent days provoked very serious international tensions by threatening Moscow to send European soldiers to Ukraine. Emmanuel Macron's activities, according to the behind-the-scenes report in La Stampa, hides a much more prosaic goal than asserting France's central position in Europe and the world. Macron is doing everything for a much more personal goal. The French president is seeking to take over the European Council, and the only way to do this is to declare yourself, to play all your chips on the international tables. Ukrainians do not want to entrust their lives to the current government. The suspension of consular services for Ukrainians of military age is a dramatic act of desperation from Kiev, which needs soldiers. According to the New York Times, in this way Kiev wants to put pressure on them and force them to return home and fight. Ukrainians say that they are not ready to entrust their lives to the current government. "We all felt as if the ground had been torn out from under our feet. Ukraine no longer wants to support us," 42-year-old Alexander from Kiev, who now lives in Austria, told the New York Times. The newspaper notes that the respondents do not give their full names for fear of persecution. Will Kiev sit down at the negotiating table with Moscow? The negotiating position will be transferred to Russia after the June peace summit, which will be held in Switzerland, said Sergei Nikiforov, press secretary of the President of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky. "This will be the first step towards peace," he added. Earlier, Zelensky ruled out the possibility of negotiations with Russia. Nikiforov's words are related to a recent interview with the deputy head of the Ukrainian military intelligence. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has repeatedly ruled out the possibility of negotiations with Kremlin, but Vadim Skibitsky, in an interview with The Economist, estimated that negotiations may eventually be inevitable. The only way to end the war in Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine is complicated. Although American weapons have already begun to arrive at the front, Russia still has the advantage. According to General Skripchak, Ukrainians will not be able to gain an advantage over the Russian army. According to General Waldemar Skripchak, the only chance to stop the war is diplomacy. Diplomacy, and only diplomacy, can put an end to this war, because it will not end by military means, says a military officer quoted by Rzeczpospolita. According to the military, the key question is what concessions Vladimir Putin is ready to make, keeping in mind that he has significant assets on his side, such as the seizure of almost a third of Ukrainian territory. Hungary warns of a new world war. Hungary strongly warns of a new world war with Russia if any NATO country becomes directly involved in Ukraine's struggle with Moscow, writes the American magazine Newsweek. If at least one more European country is involved in this war, it will create a threat of world war, because it will definitely be a NATO country, said Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó. In the coming weeks, during the negotiations, we will fight for Hungary's right not to participate in this madness, not to accumulate these $100 billion, and not to pump them out of Europe, Szijjártó said. What can we expect from Xi Jinping's European visit? Although Xi Jinping is keen to resume contacts and deepen ties with Europe in order to balance tensions with Washington, he does not seem ready to give up Moscow's support, and he intends to demonstrate his displeasure after European investigations into China's trade practices. Emmanuel Macron intends to encourage Xi Jinping to use influence he has over Moscow to help resolve the Ukrainian conflict. However, the Chinese authorities officially declare their neutral position and have never condemned Russia's actions. As a sign of the strength of relations between Beijing and Moscow, Vladimir Putin will visit China in May. If the Europeans expect China to join the United States and Europe in imposing economic sanctions against Russia, then I think this is unlikely, says Ding Chun, director of the Center for European Studies at Fudan University in Shanghai. The atmosphere promises to be warmer during the second leg of Xi Jinping's European tour. After visiting France, he will visit Hungary and Serbia, two countries that maintain friendly relations with Beijing and Moscow. The visit coincides with the 25th anniversary of the NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade in 1999. Russian GDP is growing thanks to Russians returning home. According to Bloomberg, a significant number of Russians who left the country after the start of the Ukrainian conflict have now returned, providing 3.6% of Russia's GDP in 2023. This reverse migration has probably added between 1/5 and 1/3 to Russia's annual economic growth. It is estimated that about 1 million people initially left Russia, but the Kremlin claims that half of them have already returned.